Kerouac. I want to thank everybody for coming out this afternoon, whether you've been at a lot of our events that have been going on since Thursday, or this is the first one you came out to today. I want to thank everybody for coming out. We are the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festival. Happens every year on this weekend. We celebrate, of course, Jack Kerouac in his hometown and his life and work for a better understanding and appreciation. We have our festival brochures outside. If you haven't picked one up yet, definitely do. There's still a lot more events going on today, including a book signing across the street at La Books after this event. Immediately following this event, right across the street at La Books, Charles Shuttleworth will be over there to sign copies of some of these books that he's going to be discussing the creation of today. So that's happening. We have an open mic at 4, and of course David Amram's jazz band is performing tonight. I do want to mention that if you got one of our programs that says Olympia Zorba Music Hall, that show has been moved to the back page in Kearny Square, 15 Kearny Square. So be advised of that. And there's one other event that's not in our program that's happening tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., which is a mural dedication of at the former St. Jean Baptiste Church site, and an update from the Kerouac Foundation on the plans to convert that site into the Jack Kerouac Center. It should be a fantastic event. You'll not only get a chance to meet the muralists, hear about the creation of that, but also to actually enter the church and get the update on plans for the center. But without any further ado, I'm very excited today to be able to come up and welcome you here. This is our Parker Lecture for Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, and somebody might think, what's that? Well, it's a long-standing partnership between Lowell Celebrates Kerouac and the Moses Greeley Parker Lecture Series, which has been going in Lowell for eons. And I'm very happy to bring up Dan Gutenplant, who is the current director of the Moses Greeley Parker Lecture Series, to tell you a little bit about that. So Dan, come on up.
All right. Thank you. Yes, we're excited to continue our partnership with Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. The Parker Lecture Series started back in 1917 when Moses Greeley Parker died, and established a trust so that residents of Lowell or people in the greater Lowell area could continue to get lectures for free. So we're happy to offer this for free. We have a brochure or a program out in it was just outside the door here. Pick that up on your way out. We have about 10 to 12 different lectures this year. All of them are free. If you have any interest in attending them, we would be grateful for that. I do want to recognize Paul Lappin, who kept the series going for the last 34 years. He's here today. Paul, do you want to hold your hand? Paul shared with me yesterday that today is actually Moses Greeley Parker's birthday. He would be 182 today. Paul suggested I have everybody sing happy birthday. I'm not going to make you do that, but I will introduce now Steve Eddington, who is going to tell you a little bit more about Charles Shuttleworth.
All right, thanks Dan, Mike, and I want to join with you in thanking the Parker Lecture Series for their ongoing sponsorship of this. Thank the National Park, Lowell Historical National Park, for hosting the event and giving us all the technical stuff we need. Well, the Parker Lecture is kind of the halfway point of a Kerouac festival. We start off on Thursday afternoon, late Thursday afternoon. We wrap up on with a wrap party on Monday afternoon over at the Worthing. So when we do the Parker Lecture, we're about halfway along, and as always, it's been a joy to do this, to see the people coming from all over the place, all over the United States, all over the world, to be in Jack Kerouac's hometown as we celebrate his life and life and memory here, life and literary legacy too. I guess it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I got a call from Jim Sampras, the literary executor from Kerouac Estate, asking me, kind of introduced, wanting me to know who Charles Shuttleworth was, in our phone conversation. Said he's been doing some really invaluable work on some of the journals that Jack kept when he was the Harker School up there on Desolation Peak. He says we're getting ready. The Kerouac Estate was getting ready to release some of those journals, and Charles was doing some of the editing and commentary on it. And Jim asked, he says, I know you're already close to the festival, you probably got your program in place. Any way you can find a place for Charles in there? I said, well, we do have an event that each year we call Talking Jack, which Matt Diego, who I know is out there somewhere, did a really wonderful job yesterday afternoon over at Lowell Books. So I thought, well, we can let Charles bring some of his copies of some of the manuscripts he's working on and show them around for the Talking Jack thing, which he did. And that really alerted me and a lot of other ones of us as to the really invaluable work that Charles is doing and bringing to light some of Kerouac's, a lot of Kerouac's previously unpublished work. So we're very happy to have him back here today to give us our Harker lecture. Charles, I think are you basically an East Coast guy who's been up to the West Coast? Do I have that? Yeah, right, yeah, okay. Charles teaches at the Harker School in San Jose, California. Teaches a class on Kerouac and the beats that I had a very enjoyable time with out there a few years ago. He's published, like I say, he's working on some of these writings of Jack's, particularly those housed at New York Public Library's Kerouac Archive, and also the latest one has been a focus on Kerouac's Buddhist phase. So as I say, we'll have Charles, we'll give his presentation here, we'll do some Q&A for a while, and then I hope as many of you as can, we'll reconvene over across the street at Lowell Books, where they have some of the journals and works that Charles has been working on. Charles Shuttleworth, thank you very much. Welcome to Lowell.
So first thing is, it may run long. So if you want to go, go. But feel free. And there's an exciting announcement, and that is that the Buddhist years, which is going to come out in February, we have advanced uncorrected copies. And so the deal over at Lowell Books will be, if you buy one of the other books, which is Desolation Peak, The Truth in Beautiful, Meaningful Lies book, which is like quotations, Self-Portrait, which just came out in August, and the Buddhist years, which will come out in February, we give you this. So that's pretty good. All right, so I'm going to do the best I can. The thing was, it was very unclear whether the Buddhist years would be ready. It was supposed to be out in October, so it got delayed. And so what I ended up doing was expanding the presentation, right, to cover all the work that I've been doing at the Bird. And I thought first I would actually give just a really quick background on how I got into all this. So the first thing was, I think I was in college, summer sublet with an English teacher, and I said, what Kerouac should I read? So I don't think I'd read any yet. I might have read On the Road, but anyway, he said The Subterraneans. So that was my copy of The Subterraneans. The next thing that really got me going, which I think was just after graduating college, was Dennis McNally's Desolate Angel. And it just exploded because not only, it really puts it in, I really recommend it. What I do is, it's how I start my class with my high school seniors. We read the book about the first third up to the point where Jack writes On the Road. But it gives the whole history, like, you know, the Depression era, he was really a historian. And so he really puts it into a context, which I think is fabulous, and the kids really respond to it. In 1993, I got to teach at the Horace Mann School, which is where Jack went. And so what happened there was I taught the class for the first time to senior elective. And I contacted through the alumni office as many of his old classmates as I could get. And I got 35 and then 5 written responses and wrote that up and presented it at the NYU Beat Generation Conference in 1994 in the spring. So that was great. And I have those recordings, and I would say, let's say within 6 months, I'll try to have a website up where you can listen to those recordings. They're all fabulous. Then I taught at the Dwight School, and so the issue here was it was the IB program. And the IB program has a set number of authors who are authorized, and Kerouac's not one of them. So I did 2 things. One is, as a summer read for the seniors coming in, I would have them read Dharma Bums along with Eat, Pray, Love. And it was a really good connection because they were the same age at the time that they experienced what Kerouac was Dharma Bums, and he's hitchhiking and riding freight trains, and she's going off to Italy and India and Bali on this very expensive, and both of them are trying to find themselves. And so the kids that like Dharma bums better were always my favorites. And now I'm at the Harker School in California. And so the nice thing was, again, for years there, I really couldn't teach a Kerouac course. And so I can at Harker, 2 pictures of the campus. And one of the nice things about being in California for this course is that Dennis McNally's out there. So Dennis McNally every year talks to my students. We go to the Beat Museum and meet him there. And he's just terrific. In 2017, I started teaching the class in 2015. So in 2017 summer, I'm back in New York, which is where I'm from, staying a week, seeing my mom. And I walked into the New York Public Library for the first time, and my credential was the fact that I teach this class. And within an hour, I was in the archive. And this is the main reading room, but this is the Berg room. This is where the archive is. And it's just, it's locked. And I can tell you that the first day I was there, I didn't dare go to the bathroom because I didn't know if they'd let me back in. So it really was an amazing experience. And once I was in there, I was not going to leave. So I've been there ever since. I have 67 total days spent at the Berg since 2017, and 5 days in the Lowell archive, which I would love to spend more time in also. But I continue to go back to the Berg. The archive is just vast. And so what I'm going to try to do is give you a sense of all the work that I've been doing and what it all means to me, what it adds up to. And also to give you some excerpts from Self-Portrait, which came out in August, and the Buddhist Years, which is coming. Okay, and I do have an opening statement. All right, so I'm going to read it. I believe Jack Kerouac is still vastly underappreciated. When Dennis McNally, this was him in the day, decided to write his book, which was a dissertation for a PhD in history, he was setting out to write a history of the counterculture, and he felt it all began with Kerouac, the first voice of opposition to post-World War II America's militarism and materialism. Kerouac in his writings predicted, described, and heavily influenced 2 major countercultural movements, each a decade ahead of time. Defining the beat movement in the late 40s, when it didn't become part of popular culture until the late 50s, and describing the hippie movement's beliefs in free love, religiosity, and back-to-nature philosophy when he wrote the Dharma Bums in '57, a decade before the human being, the generation gap, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, etc., etc. And by the way, Jerry Garcia, Ken Kesey, Janis Joplin, to name 3, are people who credit On the Road as having changed their lives' directions. Okay. Apart from being a huge cultural figure, as a writer, his stylistic experiments in both prose and poetry are still understudied and undervalued. Allen Ginsberg developed his poetic style through Jack. In a 1955 letter to Jack, in which he included an early draft of Howl, Ginsberg wrote that, quote, "It came out in your method, sounding like you, an imitation practically." So while it was through Ginsberg and other beats that the major shift in poetics occurred, Kerouac was the catalyst. As Joyce Johnson brilliantly details in The Voice Is All, Jack was always seeking to be a stylistic innovator. He was searching for the prose voice that would speak to a new consciousness and reflect the postmodern world, just as the abstract expressionists were doing with painting. The latter just found fame quicker and made a lot more money. The primary thrust of all his writing, which was intense self-examination, anticipated or led the way, you decide, for the subsequent trends in autofiction and memoir writing. And while in this sensitive age he may be criticized for the sexism that appears in his writing, and less convincingly as racially insensitive or a cultural appropriator in his posthumous novel Pick, for one thing, he was a man of his time. What he left behind was an unparalleled portrait of precisely that, an urban bohemian in the mid-20th century, an intensely neurotic anti-hero, whose words, thoughts, and deeds, both good and bad, are described in great detail and great honesty over many, many thousands of pages. He is a shy, neurotic, unself-confident egomaniac, a religious seeker, a man with a death wish and an intense fear of death, an absentee father with a Peter Pan complex, and never resolved issues with both of his parents. The value of the archival writings that I've been helping to publish is that it deepens and enriches the portrait. We get to know him even better as the writings reveal more and more facets of his personality. And one more thing to keep in mind. One of Kerouac and Ginsberg's favorite professors at Columbia was Raymond Weaver. Weaver had lived in Japan and was very influential, introducing them to Zen Buddhism, haiku, the Christian Gnostics, and Melville's Pierre. But perhaps most important was Weaver's background as a Melville scholar. He had written the first Melville biography and discovered the Billy Budd manuscript, ushering in the Melville revival in the 1920s, 70 years after writing Moby Dick. So Kerouac, who dedicated his whole life to writing and was aiming for nothing short of writing immortality, was aware that it could take that long to be fully appreciated, for the genius of his writing to be recognized, and now it's been just about that long, 67 years since the publication of On the Road, 73 years since he wrote it. So, okay. All right. Okay, so I just want to, again, background about the bird. So, in going to the bird, the first thing I wanted to read, because I've always been interested in the spiritual Kerouac. You know, so his Buddhist period to me is the most interesting just on an emotional level, because he was at his writing prime and he was writing just kind of more emotional spiritual stuff. So the first thing I asked to see was the Desolation Notebook. And the moment I read it, I'm like, this has to be published some way, someday. So I contacted Jim Santos because in those days it was still the point when all you could do, they gave me the notebook. It's right in front of me. No gloves. Pretty cool. But you can only write on lined paper with a pencil. So I said, look, I live in California. I need to transcribe this. And they said, you have to contact Jim Santos, and if he gives you permission to photograph it, then you can take the photographs. So that's what I did. I contacted Jim. He was really open to it, really excited, and so I went back in February. This was August, and did that, and that was the start of it. And in terms of Desolation Peak, then, I continued to look for what other pieces were written there, because in the notebook it made it clear that he'd written nonstop. So the question is, where were these things? And the big discovery was finding the Ozone Park manuscript. So. Right, just one more thing about the bird. That's Charles Dickens's desk that sits in the corner. This is the Desolation Park notebook. And actually, it's very vague, I doubt you can see it, but it says Dharma 11. So to him, he was continuing some of the Dharma work. It just ended up becoming a different thing. And then what you see in the sticker down there, it said number 1. And I'm going to talk about that later, but that's very significant also. Okay, so the notebook begins when he's starting to hitchhike up to Desolation Peak. One of the most important things about that, I mentioned 4 things that were important about that notebook. One was he hitchhiked 950 miles, and he had $14.57. It took him 17 days to get paid, and by the end of the 17 days, he had 2 cents left. So money was a real issue for him. He also was afraid a little bit of what it was going to be like up there, so he did draw an imaginary abominable snowman with a bow and arrow. And just, there were some other doodles that are in the book that are kind of interesting. It says, if you can read it, enjoy life for what it's worth. And I zoomed in on the right. This is what he was doing also to keep his sanity. He was making $9.50 a day sitting up there. And so what he started to do was record it, because this was going to give him the freedom to travel when he got down. And then he realized he had expenses. He owed $50 for the food that he got at the store, and he owed Ginsberg some money. So then he started to record pure money, which is how much he would actually have, and that was in parentheses. Okay. So one manuscript that he started there was the Martin family, and it's just interesting to see how his mind works, because what he did was he wrote Martin Family by John Kerouac, sequel to The Town and the City. So he started that, but he just didn't have his heart in it, and anyway, it's good, but he stops, right? And he was writing it, by the way, on these sheets of paper, aircraft flash message records. And if you read chapter 8 of Desolation Angels, he talks about this paper, which he also used to roll his cigarettes. And he really kind of laughs about it. This is the Cold War, and he's up there, and some guy came and gave them all this paper and made a speech and said, if you see an unidentified aircraft, write it down. Right, so he didn't bother. He used the paper to write his manuscript. This was the big discovery, because this was miscatalogued in the Berg. It simply said that it was an untitled manuscript called Begin Here. And it begins talking about his father killing mice that were in the closet of their apartment. And I read this in The Voices All and made the connection in my head, because you probably can't read this, but anyway, in the Desolation Notebook, he kills mice that are driving him nuts at night. They're in the little cabin with him. So why I think this is really significant is because it points out that when he's writing his stories about his own past, the present always seeps in, and it always affects it, right? So for instance, in Visions of Gerard, there's all the Buddhist references, which has nothing to do with when Gerard was a little boy. And in Dr. Sachs, he's writing it in Mexico, and suddenly Dr. Sachs yells, Pala la Kona, beware. And that's the Aztec world, it's an Aztec god. It says it's the world sun snake. So, his mind is on the past, but yet always in the present, and it's much more of a stream of consciousness thing. That's what he wrote this manuscript on, was the daily log. And then he also wrote the Diamond Cutter of Perfect Knowing, which was a new version. He was transforming the Diamond Sutra into a form that he thought might be more palatable for an American audience. So he carved it into 7 days, and you can read this portion on Monday and this portion on Tuesday. And he edited it and changed a lot of the language. So he called it a transliteration. So anyway, that's okay. So that's Desolation Peak. That's one of the books that's available. So I want to get into some later discoveries. All right, that's how I got started. All right, first thing I really studied, because again, I'm really interested in the Buddhist period, was the Mexico City Blues notebooks. Because, I was having trouble with Mexico City Blues, to penetrate it. And really, now I find it brilliant, and I understand it now, much better. So he wrote the poems, and he has that method of each page is a chorus, right? But the interesting thing is, first of all, how it began organically, and then second of all, how he rearranged it. So he didn't change a lot of the lines, although some of them are significant, but like changes when he typed. One of the big things that I really would argue is that when he typed from his notebooks, it was another layer of artistry, right? I mean, he simply was not, like Truman Capote said, he wasn't just typing, right? So in the corner there, you can see very vaguely that it says MC1. You probably can't see it, but anyway, maybe. This was the first page, just to show you. So it's a complete doodle page, except what's at the bottom is a little piece that goes into some of the Dharma. This is the first poem, right? It begins magic of ignorance. And again, I would, if you haven't read the scroll version of On the Road, you're not going to pick up how meaningful Butte was to him. He thought it was where the perfect bar was. And at the same time, ignorance was everybody who's not aware that they are in heaven now, that kind of thing. So then the next 3 or 4 pages is simply more some of the Dharma, right? So he wrote one poem, and then he went off and was writing some of the Dharma stuff, and then finally he went back. Number 2 is on page about 7 of that notebook. So just to make a point. And then, here's some of the other notebook covers. The biggest thing that he did was he wrote a poem that's 15 pages long, and it starts a new notebook. And James Jones accurately explained it in the map of Mexico City Blues, that he called it the Lowell Canto. And in fact, it begins about his childhood, and then it segues to his father, Leo, and it follows him for like, again, it's about 7 pages and then 8 pages, something like that. Originally, all the numbering, so for instance, you see number 97 in the corner, right? All the numbering came later. It's very clear that that happened. And then, you know, so, and this poem, which was just a poem, right? It has a Roman numeral 2 where the Leo part starts, right? He took that out when he integrated it into Mexico City Blues. So again, there was a lot there. Okay, what's next? Some of the Dharma, I studied some of the Dharma notebooks, and what I found was, in particular, it seems, if you look at some of the Dharma, that these are, he says it's book 1 and it's notebook 1 or whatever, notebook 2, notebook 3. Notebook 8 is actually a collage. It's material drawn from 6 different notebooks, one of which was the Mexico City Blues notebook. Only one of the 6 was actually labeled a Dharma notebook. All the other ones were just these other rambling notebooks, and he just, you know, and if you notice, sorry, this is my copy, I couldn't, so I've got all my notes there. But the thing is, even in typing it, right, I mean, it's just, his mind is going and he's creating this collage. And, you know, to me, that's really interesting. The next thing was Book of Dreams, and Book of Dreams also, a lot of censorship, really. You know, he toned some of the you know, when he wrote it down, his dreams, some of them are pretty graphic, and he toned them down. But he also, what was fascinating, what I want to show you is the Book of Dreams typescript, which was really, you know, he's just really kind of creative. I mean, this is, oh, sorry. So that's the cover, and I think it's page 1 or 2, and, you know, he's just trying to create the dreamscape. He did some drawings also that he mixed in. These are full-page drawings, and then he did this collage, which, you know, just interesting, you know. And then finally, there's this, and that's the flying horses of Mienmo Mountain, and he actually drew one of the flying horses and taped it in to the typescript. Okay, what's next? Next is, this was another discovery, and this is in the Buddhist years. It was misrepresented in the bird catalog. They said it was an early version of On the Road. In fact, it says On the Road at the top. What really was happening was, he was committed to writing a book called On the Road. And what happened was, this is 1954, he still hadn't gotten the On the Road book published, so he's still going to use that title. Really, it's called The Legend of Three Houses, and you know, where I recognized that it was not an early version of On the Road was the Buddhist stuff that's in it. So yeah, I'm going to read a little bit of that later, I think. All right, and then the last part is, just another couple tidbits. The goddess Pooh Bear, which is in, this is again from some of the Dharma, came to him in 1954, so it's not in the scroll, right? And so that image of goddess Pooh Bear really came from later on. And the point here is that he claimed he never revised, and he did revise. And you know, Malcolm Cowley said he revised, and he revised well. And I think that's one of the examples. So I've been working most recently looking at pre-On the Road material, the 3 years that led up to him writing the scroll with Matt Theodo. And there's just some amazing things that's there. One of the things is that he was trying to, there are at least 4 maybe examples of this, where he was writing this first paragraph of On the Road, which ultimately became the last paragraph in the novel. So here's just an example of how it read. When the sun goes down, when smoky stars shine our roofs in the autumn night, and the child is warm and safe in his father's house, everybody knows, and even the child knows, there will come a time when he would be left alone in the raw world night, and like the Laodicean, he will be wretched and miserable and poor and blind, naked. When he will have to go out and earn his own living and bow his head and walk the sleep in vain, and learn that we all come from a perfidy of dust, till with a mask of disgusted flesh for a face and the soul of a gruesome, grieving ghost, he will go shuddering through nightmare life, cluttering up the earth as he dies, before he's ever done with it. But in America, when the sun goes down, beginning in the east at dusk of the day, making the shrouded golden darkness that covers the dirty old buildings with beauteous light of temples, and always outlining these shades to flame 3,000 miles over the bend and groaning bulge of the continent to the west coast before sloping down the Pacific, leaving the rear guard night to creep upon the earth, darken every river, cup the peaks, and fold the final shore in. As foggy lights glow and everybody hurries home underneath immensity, only a child knows with a pure knowledge of his own that something beautiful waits for him in these raw things. Only the child is ever really ready for life as God or nature cranked it. To live like a ghost that has died and is back to see what he did not see in the anxious living days is to live like the pure, courageous child. Okay, so, if you know the last chapter of On the Road, or if you've heard him read it, on the Steve Martin show, you know that this is just another take, right? And he wrote it 3 years before this role, maybe 2. Okay. Also, another little important find was that in October of '56, so this is now 5.5 years after the scroll, he wrote this On the Road insert. And it's a key passage, right? In chapter 1, the end of chapter 1, right after the things that were to come are too fantastic not to tell. That's where the scroll ends. He adds this passage that describes Dean Moriarty as some long-lost brother, a Western kinsman of the sun, and the final sentence, somewhere along the line, I knew there'd be girls, visions, everything. Somewhere along the line, the pearl would be handed to me. Again, this came much later, yet to me that's a key part. And he also then edited out the pearl of intelligence and light. So my students are always asking me, what's the pearl? Well, he laid it out and then decided to leave it to others to think about it. All right, so self-portrait. Self-portrait came out in August. I really have to say that I think this is a great book. I think it's, if you love Kerouac, the more you read him, the deeper you go. And his subject is himself, so you just get new perspectives. Actually, that was the last paragraph of my something happened. Anyway, the material's great. So what's in there? One of them is Winter Journal, which has both an early take. It's right after he got back from his first trip, and he talks about being lost in the Des Moines hotel room, not knowing who he was. And then it also has a long description of the Ghost of the Susquehanna episode, which is near the end of book 1. And this one's much more detailed, really interesting. And again, we were just talking about Pick today. Pick also has another take on the Ghost of the Susquehanna. So there's the I woke up in the hotel room in Des Moines, Iowa. So included in self-portrait are really 4 pieces that are that relate to On the Road. This one, the Winter Journal, then Ray Smith, which fictionalizes the first trip only as far as he gets to Bear Mountain Bridge, and then pouring rain. And what he does in this version is he runs, when he's in the pouring rain at the Bear Mountain Bridge, he meets Warren Beauchamp, who is modeled after Lucien Carr. And they end up going by bus back to New York, which again, it's just the very first part of On the Road. He expanded it, and it goes, they have a whole episode in New York, a very interesting scene, and then at some point he gives up on it, which is what he does, right? He does this over and over again. He just feels he's on the wrong track. So that was the Ray Smith character. Then he did Shades of the Prison House, which was more of a kind of a Cassidy character, although it's sort of a mix. Red Moultrie, and he's in the Bronx jail, which is where Kerouac was after Lucien Carr killed David Cameron. And so that experience of the prison time in the prison he was using. And it's a long scene where it's his last night in prison, and there are all these other characters in there. A lot of them are members of the mob. And so it's, again, a very interesting scene, and Red's imagining he's going to be free the next day, and all the places he wants to go, there's this like sort of ecstatic explosion of thoughts about all the places to go. And again, that just sort of ends. So Ray Smith was 48, Shades of the Prison House 49. He's searching for a way to tell this story. And the closest he gets before he writes the scroll is The Flower That Blows in the Night. And that's this one. And it's a short story. Chad and Dean have just driven cross country. They're stopping for a night in a hip California town where they score marijuana, find a bar in the black section of town where wild jazz is playing, which is a precursor to the scene in part 3 that was published as Jazz and the Beat Generation, New World Writing. Dean's character is fully formed, spouting sayings like "no more land," "smell the people," "we know time," and then he's feverishly yelling "go, go, go" at the tenor sax man. So they're all great pieces. Highly recommended self-portrait. There's also one, Visions of Gerard, Precursors, right? He has a short piece called Gerard where he tells the famous family stories of Gerard staring up at the sky, seeing lambs in the clouds, saving a mouse from a mousetrap only to have the family cat eat it, birds flocking inside the window, and then all leaving after his death. This was done years before Visions of Gerard. But again, those were the family stories. Now, in the Buddhist years, there's something called The Heart of the World, The Legend of Duluaz. And it was written in 1954, and it includes that whole section where Leo goes and he plays poker with W.C. Fields' character. All of that he'd already written in what's being submitted here. It's different, but it's very similar. And so literally, again, when he's writing the Visions of Gerard notebooks, which I have not seen, he simply had this piece that he inserted, and it really, if you think about it, it really is an insertion, right? It just all of a sudden, it's all about Gerard, and then it just switches over to Leo for a while. But it's very poignant also, because he gets into some kind of deep philosophical discussions. Actually, it's set not on right when Gerard's about to die. This original one is the day of Jack's birth. And so Leo's actually saying to himself, another mouth to feed. And, anyway, it's all very emotional. Let's see what's next. Okay, the point of all this is the debunking of Kerouac's own self-defeating claim. Oh, that's the Gerard one. Sorry about that, I fell behind. And there's the Legend of Duluaz in its original form. But I wanted to bring this up, that two articles that Philippe Lebrun posted on Facebook recently, one by the San Francisco Chronicle in the May of '57, so he was out there in Berkeley, On the Road got published in September. And then the Orlando Evening Star in August, just a week or so before On the Road got published. In both of these stories, Kerouac denies that he revises, right? He says, whatever you try to delete from a manuscript, that's what's most interesting to a doctor. That's what he said to the San Francisco Chronicle. And to the Orlando Evening Star, he says, I never revise, I don't change anything. So, to me, okay, I have a little piece on this. The truth is that in writing his novels, he drew from his diaries, letters, and previous writings. Also, the creation of typescripts from his handwritten notebooks was another level of his artistry. In a 1993 interview, Philip Whalen described, quote, watching Jack type right out of his notebook and laugh and add stuff and make mistakes and add other things and cut some things and not copy some pages and things like that. So again, there's an eyewitness just saying, and probably that was Mexico City Blues. This is the truth about Jack's process, which is evident when studying the notebooks and against the public versions of texts like Mexico City Blues, Some of the Dharma, Book of Dreams, etc. His notebooks were his raw material. Very good raw material, but not requiring a lot of revision, but revise he did. So why say he didn't? Right? First, he chose to be a spokesman, promoting the first word, best word theory of writing as writing in its purest form, straight from the mind, unfiltered and confessional, as he learned from Catholic confession. And to me, it's a democratic notion that art is not just for artists. So I do think he was out there to make a point, right? He says everybody can do it, everybody has a story. One other way to look at it, on the other hand, psychologically, maybe he was really just being self-defeating. As he said to his sister Nin in a 1945 letter, he was age 23, Burroughs had been psychoanalyzing him non-professionally. And so he this is a quote from the letter. Burroughs says, and he doesn't mention Burroughs by name, says, "I don't want to be successful, that something destructive in me, in my subconscious mind, works against all that. A subconscious will to failure, a sort of death wish stems from something I did before I was 5 years old, and which stamped on me an erotic and horrible feeling of guilt. It was survivor guilt for having lived when his brother Gerard died. And it's my goal to continue these studies and continue to uncover the truth." Sorry, about Jack Kerouac's artistic process. Okay, so more about self-portrait. I really like the early stuff. He's got a 1939 diary that he kept for 5 days before he started in Horseman. And if you get the audio version, the guy nails it. Really gets the voice down of the 17-year-old Jack. Voyage to Greenland is a fantastic diary of his first trip as a merchant marine. And then right after that, he wrote a short story, not very long, that really kind of epitomizes that experience. So that's really interesting to read first. I wanted to say something about self-portrait, right? I mean, it started with Paul Marching, right? And if you've read Becoming Kerouac, which he meant it as a companion piece too, he's really good on the 40s. You know, I think Becoming Kerouac is a very strong work, especially in the early section. And he knew this 40s stuff that I didn't know. So it was really exciting to work with him. I think we put together a great book. So this is the journal from 1939. Sorry, I keep falling behind. This is Voyage to Greenland. And just another point about how he keeps, this is all raw material. That's the way he saw it. So first of all, it says Voyage to Greenland, right, 1942, Growing Pains, blah, blah, blah. But then he has and then that's the first page on the other side. And impeccable handwriting. But then he puts in this quote, right, that he writes in 1949. So 7 years later, he's looking back at this manuscript and he writes, "All life is but a skull bone and a rack of ribs through which we keep passing food and fuel just so we can burn so furious beautiful." You know, just fascinating to be in this archive and, you know, kind of see all this stuff. How am I doing? Okay, I wanted to read this one. It's called The Power of the Subconscious Mind, written, again, dated September 1943. He's on his second merchant ship, and he writes about his dreams. So his dreams always had tremendous power for him, and these are fairly, you know, it's an incredible piece. I'm reading, I think, most of it. "Two horrible dreams in the past 2 nights have assailed me, and despite their upsetting effect, I'm eager to discuss them purely for the sake of their brilliance. This situation may be likened to the aesthetic satisfaction some people have been known to experience when introduced to ancient methods of torture. They say, 'Oh, how perfect, how painful, how thorough, how beautifully ugly.' And I, in recalling my nightmares, am likely to say, 'How horrible, and yet how perfectly woven with such power and stark beauty.' And truly, such were my dreams. The first one, I stood in a hall crowded with people, a hall vaguely resembling the hall of the National Maritime Union in New York, and was in the act of discoursing with several vaguely defined companions when I caught sight of my father's face coming toward me over the shoulder of the friend in front of me. He looked at me in a very pained way, and appeared weary with care and distraction. No sooner had I begun to feel my heart wrenched from its moorings with remorse and solicitude, than I next perceived the beloved face of my mother. She and my father walked toward me and stopped. Both their eyes were heavy with weeping and puffed up as though they had both been crying day and night. Their eyes seemed to say, 'Why did you forsake us?' Most disturbing of all, they stood in front of me and said nothing, only their pained and tired look, a look which seemed to me then as representative of all the strife and horror they'd been through since my departure. All this was enough to break my heart, hadn't my mother spoke up in the dream. She turned up the palm of her hand in a gesture of pitiful affection and longing. She said, 'We've been weeping so.' That was too much. I awakened violently and found myself cold with fever and perspiration, distressed and frightened and shocked with the brutality of my dream. I've come now to a point where I can hardly go on, for the night after I dreamed that my mother had died while pining for me, died in sufferance. And to cap it all with the utmost of bizarre irony, the news was brought triumphantly to me by my sweetheart, who more than once in my conscious life seemed jealous of my loving devotion for my mother. This is Edie, right? What could be more horrible than this last dream? And how can I explain for the terrifying symbolism of that subconscious creation? It was sheer horror and sheer drama. I wept and wept in the dream. I was frantic with fear and loss, and beseeched my sweetheart not to leave me in my distress and violent sorrow. And it seemed stormy in the skies. Everything was dark and ominous, and the girl told me the news with such a madness of perverted triumph that my whole world seemed to crumble down to its foundations. Where was my mother? Oh, she was dead for months now, had died weeping for me, and there in my sweetheart's eyes shone the gleam of madness. I had to die. I couldn't. The world was no more. It was only the remnant of a world, dark with horror, windy with hysteria, mad with mocking and rumbling with doom. Fortunately, the ship's alarm awakened me violently. I tell you, it was a joy to return to concrete dangers, to the war. We all ran to our lifeboats and stood by. I, for one, felt relieved. I had nothing to fear from a German submarine, not when I had to cope with dreams such as these, with a gigantic genius of the subconscious, with this Aeschylean grandeur and tragedy, with that monster that crouched in my own mind and sprung at me every chance I could get to torture and twist my poor heart. So, to me, just some amazing stuff. The next section of self-portrait is the self-ultimacy period, what he called a revolutionary re-examination of self, wrestling with Nietzschean concepts while recommitting himself to his art. He was hiding out at a Columbia dorm, 6th floor of Warren Hall, rooms empty because of the war, not informing his wife Edie or his parents that he was back in New York after jumping ship in Virginia. So what's interesting about both dialogues and introspection, and then the next one, the dark corridor, is he used both a pencil and then also a red crayon. And basically the dialogue goes back and forth between his creative self and his moral self as he decides what he should be doing with his life. And it's pretty interesting. It's a little thick, but he's only 22, so give him a break. The Dark Corridor, again, it's in a different format. This one's all question, just back and forth questions. This one's numbered, and it's really another dialogue in a different format, again using a mix of pencil and red crayon. He's talking to himself at times in French, right? So the French really gets in there. And, and in the archive, a lot of his manuscripts, he sometimes goes back and forth in French. Maggie Cassidy in particular. I just wanted to read the dialogue. It's number 7 in red. What he says is, and this is May of 1946, and even when she tells me her dreams did not come true because she'd always been poor, am I supposed to feel perhaps I should have helped her because she is my mother? So, the mother stuff is just, you see it in this Powers of the Subconscious Mind. It continues all his life. It's just one of the things that he was always wrestling with. On to the Buddhist years. The Buddhist years, there are a couple of slides here which are included in the photographs. When he was hiding out in Warren Hall there, he actually was taking, I guess, some sort of a sharp object to his finger, and he wrote blood on the thing, and then he writes the blood of the poet. He was really, this was a moment in his life when he was committing himself to his art. He was going to live for art, nothing else. 1945, he's 22, or 44, sorry. So then he even writes, blood-stained string used as a tourniquet for my finger. Again, the blood of the poet, little X. And then he has 2 quotes. One is, art is the highest task and proper metaphysical activity of life, from Nietzsche. And for the Rimbaud quote, I translated it, it's from A Season in Hell. When will we go beyond the beaches and the mountains to greet the birth of new work, the new wisdom, the flight from tyrants and demons, the end of superstition, to worship the first Christmas on earth? So, interesting. All right, now the Buddhist years. Okay, so there's all sorts of stuff that's fascinating. Really, again, it's my favorite period. He goes back and forth between doing kind of his fictional stuff with Buddhist elements in it, and sometimes, something like The Blessedness Surely to Be Believed, where he's trying to lay out for people why they should be happy, because life's an illusion. This is really a fascinating one-page document. It's called Modified Aesthetic Life. It was written on 20th Century Fox film stationery because he was synopsizing scripts. And what he did was he was writing out a list for himself of the ways he was going to earn nirvana over the years. It starts with no chasing after women anymore, no hankering to lust and create sorrow and multiply desires and rage, no more drunkenness on alcohol, no more sipping, no sickening of healthy body or temporary numbing of body blanking mind. It goes further. I don't have a slide for this, but number 6 is finally, after 5-volume life, so he wasn't ready to quit writing yet. No more writing for communicating in after sketchbooks of wilds. No more writing or I, art, ego of any kind. Finally, no I, self or name. No shaving of beard. This is 1960. 1970, which he never reached. No possessions finally, but wilderness robe. No hut, no mirror. Begging at houses of village. Number 8, no communication with rest of world or family. Number 9, Diana and contemplative ecstasy. And 2000, Nirvana and willed death beyond death. So, interesting. This is my favorite piece. I found it actually really early on in my days at the Berg, and I'm so pleased that it's published now. So, I have 2 passages from it, and I'll read the first one and I'll look for a clue whether I get to read the second one. This is the beginning, chapter 1, My Discovery of the Dark. The long night of life is over, in quotation marks. When I hear these words in the silence of the night, and my essential mind shines with an empty brightness that seems to come from all numberless directions on the universe, like a vision of paradise, older than the earth itself, and much older, infinitely older than mere human visions of paradise, I know that because it will soon be true, amen, thus it is, Om, it is already true. And what was the long night of life anyway? It was birth, the cause of birth. It was suffering, the cause of suffering. And now it is enlightenment, the cause of enlightenment. And this enlightenment consists of the realization that birth was the cause of suffering, and suffering was the cause of enlightenment, and enlightenment is the cause of the destruction of suffering, which now frees me from this long night of life. I was born on March 12, 1922 in Lowell, Massachusetts, of simple French-Canadian folk. My father was an insurance salesman. Big, jolly, good-hearted, handing out cigars around town. He believed in goodness and got mad when he saw badness. His temper, based on a trustfully Christian sense of justice, eventually got the better of him, and he died 24 years later of cancer of the spleen. They say the spleen is the source of anger, and so I suppose the cancer grew there and multiplied on itself as he raged in his mind, like a demon god hopelessly snared in a net of injustice, which he would seek to destroy, ending up destroying himself before his time. Even when I was young, I would say, but why get so mad? They're dishonest, but you're not dishonest, and all you do is make yourself mad thinking about them. I tell you, it makes me mad to think of all the things that are going on. The hypocrites, the liars, the crooks, the flatterers, the self-important fools, the destroyers. I tell you, this was a good world when I was a boy. But it wasn't at all. His father, Jacques Kerouac, was a farmer in the howling plains of Quebec. He had 10 children. The diet was mostly potatoes, and the peels were saved for potato soup. This was the result of the wars between the French Canadians in canoes and the redcoat British with their cannons. Deeper than that, it was the result of the original destitution of the Indian people of the New World by the invasion from West Europe. Deeper than that, it was the result of sin of the Indian himself. His greed among neighbors, his slaughter of harmless animals for meat, his murderous rages due to pride, his concupiscence, his attachment to the bloody wheel of life and death. Deeper than that, it was the result of nature herself, her voracious scenery, her upheaval of madness, her chaos of storms, destruction, birth, suffering, and death. Deeper than that, it was the result of the 4 great elements, earth, water, fire, and air, combining at the beginning of creation in an ignorant mass of warring details that produced and destroyed one another, and provided for the continuation of production and destruction. Deeper than that, it was the result of ignorance, appearing like waves on the perfect calm of emptiness, giving rise to illusion, to the shape of things, to the incontrovertible law of things that is their suffering and destruction. Deeper than this, the cause was mind, the universal essence of mind, which nevertheless since beginningless time has ever remained pure and undisturbed by all this, because it is free from illusion, free from ignorance, free from the shape of things, free from birth, from suffering, from destruction, from the apparition of men in this tiny ash called earth, and free from all their conceptions concerning cause, birth, life, personality, injustice, destruction, and death. I had a long way to go in this long night of life when I sought to explain to my father why he shouldn't get mad, and in trying to convince him, we warred. And I got mad myself, and he died. And yet, and I died with him in my heart. Okay, next paragraph. My mother was Gabrielle Levesque. She was from French-Canadian people who lived in Nashua, New Hampshire. But her mother, while pregnant, took a trip to Montreal, and due to a big snowstorm, Gabrielle saw the light of the star of her pity there in 1895. A twin was born with her but died. And a few weeks later, her mother died. 12 years later, her father died. In 1926, her son Gerard, my brother, died at the age of 9. A sad angel rested from her arms. And then her husband died. Everyone died on her. Like the noble Nanon of Balzac's Grande, she went on cooking, scrubbing, working. Like the noble Francois of Proust's Remembrance, she did not sleep nor undress till the dead were in their graves. Like some devout and ancient saint of Orthodox Russia, to this day her sleep couch rattles with rosary bead at midnight. She burns candles for the Virgin Mary. She has holy water for the storm. A giant crucifix hangs on the wall of my tiny room, where a couch is provided for me with clean sheets and a dresser full of clean mended clothing. From the time she was 14, when an orphan living with her father's sisters in Nashua till this day, with a few interruptions provided by my father's efforts and mine on one occasion, she has been getting up at 5:30 a.m. to go to work in the shoe factory. I never had anything, she says. Some women get up when they want, spend the day doing nothing, or causing trouble with the neighbors. And when their husbands come home at night, they complain they want this, they want that, they haven't got enough. I'll never have anything till the day I die. Everything I ever had slipped through my fingers. My mother, my twin sister, my father, my son, my husband. And she yawns because she never gets enough sleep and goes to bed on her narrow couch while other women stretch in big beds in large homes in the neighborhood. And I hear the rattle of her rosary beads. Sunday morning she goes to church and gives donations and lights the votive candles. And the only thing I can say to her is, it's established in the law of things, which is all too true. Okay. All right, so I'm not going to read chapter 3 because I get even more emotional with chapter 3. So I'll read one more. It's from On the Path. And he wrote this. Oh, by the way, he wrote that in particular when he was, he just visited Lowell. And so there's just wonderful chapters in The Long Night of Life when he's revisiting these places and thinking about them. And in particular, the emotional one, he thinks about Gerard and the castle on the hill where he came up with Dr. Sachs. Okay, so On the Path, he wrote in Mexico City, right before he started the Mexico City Dreams poem, Mexico City Blues poems. And he was, this one and Avalo Kitespero, which he wrote 2 years later, he was trying to write essentially how he got into Buddhism, and so they're precursors to Dharma bums. I mean, he was writing about himself, and it was much more compelling ultimately to write about Gary Snyder and take a back seat. So this is how he starts it. And in both cases, it does say that he discovered the Buddhism in November of 53 because he was so crushed over the breakup with Aileen Lee, again in the Subterraneans, Martin Fox. And so that fixes the record. Most of the biographies say that he discovered it months later in San Jose. It was November. I had just concluded a love affair with a girl who was so pretty to me that she'd driven me mad and sometimes sex mad, as men will get with women that ravish them. In my case, dark-eyed and dark-skinned lovelies of the lazy woman's world afternoon. The very belated touch of her fingertips was a thrill. Having got so enamored of her, she perceived it and looked for something harder to get. All women are essential Napoleons. I would have drank poison in some of the lousier interviews, but I came out of it feeling like an old and lousy man whom no girl would ever cleave to again. The purpose of the rout of the Waterloos is to make a man defeated. It was November, and I lay in my room contemplating painless suicides. The most pointless of all, not to commit suicide, but to go on as though I had. I stared at my wall angrily, wearing an absurd Korean prison of war hat, earlier bought to wear to work on the railroad to get money for baby. The cold winds rattled my window. I sulked and decided to do nothing. I was convinced something would happen from outside. Idly, I thumbed through Thoreau, procured at the library. Interested I was in the thoughts of a hermit in the woods. He is magnificent. I know nothing, this is a quote, I know nothing my neighbor does that is not vicious, he might have said, a plainer, more outspoken Yankee than the female Emily Dickinson, who would put it this way, I know nothing my neighbor would do that in my buttercups might cure, right, like with her dashes. What's the sense of all this literary illusion? I walked across the Long Island Railroad yards in the autumnal night. Shadows of boys danced on boxcars. I drank wine behind tuts, on cylinders, sitting in the old tie piles in the sandy dust bank. The red light of the nearby warehouse elevator ramp swarmed with mysteries. The stars were clear. That something from the outside came at once. Thoreau talks of Hindus, philosophies from the other side of the sunrise, where you put a stop to everything and everything stops with you. And he alluded to mysteries of silent profundity. Afternoons, I crossed the rail yard slowly and went to the little library with granite and round windows and giggling high school pretties at 4. I took a book of Oriental philosophies and religions. At home at night, in my sweet and quiet room, I perused the news about the Indian Bhagavad heroes, the Zendavesta, the Quran, until I came to Ashvagoda's Life of Buddha, translated by Samuel Beal, and there I stopped. Rest behind heaven, in effect, it said. Buddha says you don't have to struggle to go to heaven. All you have to do is rest behind heaven. Beyond heaven, sorry. There is no heaven and no heaven neither. All that is to be done has been long done. Saved, sweet hero. Sufferer, your suffering is stopped. All life is suffering, so ignore life. The cause of suffering is ignorant craving. Grab no more at pretty girls. The suppression of suffering can be achieved. What? I thought? Always thought it was impossible. Suppression of suffering is possible? Thought after thought, torment after torment, night after night of human loneliness. When it rains on a cold night, fears all poof, they don't exist. They are illusions of the mortal mind. Get you to a quiet place in the woods. Sit down under a tree, stop, realize, and slip into nirvana from whence you originally came, perfect like you always suspected you were. I was dazed. I got out Lin Yu Tang, too. All books. For the first time since I was a kid in my mother's house, I sat in my room reading seriously deep into the night. One night I took Benzedrine to heighten my excitement. I hung on the paragraph about the 5 defilements and experienced my first flash of enlightenment. Go away, stop, purify your mind. Remember that everything that happens has a form. If you ignore form, it doesn't happen. Ignoring form, you don't go through the process of discrimination, of picking out, of thinking it out. Not thinking it out, naturally, there's nothing to grab. Not thinking of roast beef au jus, your mouth doesn't water. Not grabbing means of aching and aching to grab. Not aching to grab, not suffering decrepitude and decay. Not suffering decay, you never change. Not changing, you never were one way or the other and can never change to something else. Everything's all right inside, always knew it. Go away, said the silver book to my mad, salvation-haunted mind of those first nights in 1953. Purify your mind of its store of defilements, and the result will be like water in which all the sediment has settled, clear and pure as original. Okay. How are we doing? Should I stop? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to cut just to the conclusion. I'm skipping a bunch of things. Well, all right, I'll even skip that. I just want to point out the Duluaz squirrel. And the Duluaz squirrel, he wrote this design. And what I argue is that when you think of the Duluaz legend, don't just think of the novels, right? All of it. All of it. Book of Dreams, Book of Sketches, some of the Dharma. It's all part of him. Letters, journals, it's all part of the Duluaz swirl. And So, I don't know.
So it's like just a wonderful, wonderful time here. I think what we'll do is we said we're going to. How do you want to do this? We can go across the street and people can kind of converse with you there.
I'll take a few questions if you got them.
What's that?
Right? I mean, we'll go to Lowell Books. It's supposed to be 3:30, right?
Oh, right, yeah. What time we got?
That's 3:05.
Okay, let's do.
If you have a question, I'm happy
do a little
to take it.
conversation
If you
here,
want to
then
go,
we'll adjourn to Lowell Books.
again, I know I talked a long
Go ahead.
time.
I'll let you. Yeah.
I know.
Why did you get so emotional when you were reading?
Because I find his sentiments and his, oh, sorry. It's a mixture of three things. The sentiments that are expressed, the beauty of how he expresses them, and how tired I am.
I got a question.
Yeah.
I forget which date you said exactly, but it was more or less a hard date for when the Buddhist years started. Was there any hard date for coming out the back end, or was it more of a slow?
Slow.
Okay.
Okay, so this one's better. Okay, so I was hoping to get into Scripture, the Golden Eternity, which is my personal favorite, and I've written a book-length study of it, which will come out someday. He went up to the mountaintop thinking he was going to discover enlightenment. So just like Mexico City Blues, I was saying, happened almost by mistake, he just started writing. That's what the notebook shows. And it became the Scripture, the Golden Eternity. In fact, he was writing the word God, and about halfway through, he started using Golden Eternity. So he went back, erased God, and wrote TGE, right? So, you know, magnificent poetry that way. It really started to decline because when he went up on the mountaintop, it wasn't so fun. And he went back and forth. He had moments when, again, very, very bipolar-ish, right? Ecstasies and just unbelievable depressions. And what he said was, you know, it started to wane from there. You know, it was never quite the same, although it never disappears entirely. If you read his journals right to the end, he's often in the journals saying that he's alcoholic, asking for help from Jesus, from Avalokitesvara, and from Gerard. So it's still there. What I was going to make an argument about the journals, with the Desolation Peak being #1, you know, when he became famous, he did become self-conscious about his writing. I mean, he was being attacked. And so what did he want to put out there anymore? And so what he did was, he created the typescripts of Book of Dreams, of Book of Sketches, and, you know, and there's an artistry when he put those typescripts together. But he also started to write daily journal, right? And he started to number the notebooks. And again, I flashed past it, but really kind of creative covers. He looked at it, I'm quite sure, as another work, and that someday those journals would be published, and I certainly hope they will be. I went to the library intending to read them all 2 summers ago, and it was so good that I just started transcribing, and to me 57 to 59 is a book, and then maybe 60 to 69 it starts to decline, so maybe, you know, maybe it's 2 volumes, maybe it's 3. It should happen someday.
If they do end up being published, do you have a preference on them just being replicas of the pages, or would you like to see them typed out?
Well, you know, the replicas of the pages would be really hard because there's something like 5,000 pages. So, and I don't think everybody's going to want to read all that. I mean, it does get repetitive. It does get very sad. I don't want to take the sad part out, right? But I think you can. So all the good stuff you want to keep, but there's some day-to-day stuff you can leave out. And again, he's constantly deciding on what to do. He can never get started with Memory Babe, or he was trying to write, I forget what he was going to call it, Beat Spotlight. He kept trying to write Beat Spotlight, and he could just never get off the ground. So, you know, but the journals are great, but again, I think you could have some sort of special edition. You know, what we've been doing is, you know, putting out these volumes of archival stuff and then some really nice photographs in the back that show you representative pages. And, you know, maybe that's enough. You know.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Yeah?
Do you feel that there's been any adequate study or examination of Gabrielle? Not necessarily, well, obviously you have to get into the relationship with Jack, but simply her as a person. Has anybody written anything?
Nobody's done it yet, but, you know, she's worthy of a book.
Yes.
But more so, you know, again, that's why I call it the Dulois squirrel, because what happens is he's writing about her all the time, and it depends on what mood he's in, right? You know, in one letter that's in selected letters, he says nobody's ever hated my father more, and nobody, and then, you know, 2 paragraphs later, no one's ever loved my father, right? So, I mean, he really just goes all over the place. But, you know, I think she manipulated him a lot. I think she should have, I think she, again, everybody was gone from her. And she had her 2 children, and she went back and forth between New York and North Carolina, and, you know, gets sick of one, gets, you know, back and forth, and played them against each other. And, you know, the family drama is very deep, right? I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, yeah.
And as a follow-up to that, has anybody delved into her relationship with Stella and Stella's with her? Like, does anybody have any sense of whether there was any affection between the 2, or?
That's going to be hard to do. I mean, maybe in the letters, which I haven't looked at. What I've looked at is his journals, and I can tell you that the journals really drop off at about the time that Caroline dies. He just loses it, I think. He doesn't write almost a word about Caroline's death, right? And then his mother's stroke isn't really in the journals. So I think it got to be too much for him. It really, again, the journals drop off, and so getting that kind of evidence, maybe from letters, maybe there are letters there. But yeah, not in the journals. Okay. Thank you so much.
Can you just say again what the arrangement is for the book? For the people who
So Lowell Books is virtually across the street, down a little bit. If you buy Desolation Peak, what is it, Truth and Beautiful Meaningful Lives, or Self-Portrait, or if you want to pre-order The Buddhist Years in its full state, we will hand you a copy of this uncorrected proof, which is, you know, it's the full text, but it hasn't been checked, and, you know, I'm a pretty good proofreader, though. I think it's pretty good. And was there something else about that? I think that's the deal. Oh, they're going to run out. I think certainly if you, she said she didn't have hardly any copies of Desolation Peak and stuff. So, you know, if you just go up and order it, right, then we'll give you this and you'll get the other book later. Okay.
Thanks again, Charles.
Okay.